Hi guys, some secrets were never meant to be found. From cursed tombs to impossible technology that terrifies scientists, these 15 forbidden discoveries completely rewrite history. Get ready to have your mind blown. Let's start. The crypt of bones beneath the Mexican city. The hum of a modern metropolis is a constant, a vibration felt in the bones. Mexico City, a sprawling testament to human endeavor, pulses with the energy of millions. Taxis weave through crowded arteries, street vendors call out, and the shadows of glass towers stretch across ancient plazas. But beneath this relentless rhythm, beneath the asphalt and the foundations of colonial churches, lies another city, a silent, deeper memory held in the cold, damp earth. It was here, in the early 21st century, during the routine, unglamorous work of laying electrical cables near the Templo Mayor, the great Aztec sacred precinct, that workers felt the ground give way. Not a collapse, but a revelation. Their tools scraped not against soil, but against a dense, white mosaic. A mosaic made of human bone. What they had discovered was not a simple burial pit. It was a tzompantli, a skull rack, of staggering, almost incomprehensible scale. But this was different from the historical accounts. Archaeologists, descending into the gloom with their soft bristled brushes and anxious excitement, uncovered a cylindrical tower, meticulously constructed like a macabre piece of architecture. Over 600 human skulls, along with thousands of fragments, were embedded in a matrix of lime and sand. Men, women, and, most unsettling to the experts, a significant number of young adults and children. The skulls were pierced at the temples, arranged in a concentric circle facing outward, a silent, screaming mandala. This was the Tzompantli of Tenochtitlan, the very heart of the Aztec world's terrifying sacred geometry, described in conquistador diaries with a mix of horror and awe, now physically manifest. The mainstream historical fact is anchored in the year 1487, during the reign of the Aztec emperor Ahuitzotl. Spanish chronicles, like the Florentine Codex compiled by Bernardino de Sahagún, record that for the reconsecration of the Templo Mayor, a staggering number of captives, some estimates whisper a figure as high as 80,000, were led up the pyramid steps in a continuous line over 4 days. Their fate was the obsidian blade, their hearts offered to the sun god Huitzilopochtli to stave off the eternal darkness. Their heads, once adorned with life, were then skewered onto wooden poles on this great rack. The tower was a public declaration of power, a spiritual battery charged with the most potent energy the Aztecs knew, the life force released at the moment of death. It was a census of the dead, a ledger of imperial might, and a grim garden meant to nourish the gods themselves. For the Mexica people, this was not mere brutality. It was a sacred contract with the cosmos, a necessary reciprocity to ensure the sun would rise, the rains would fall, and the world would not end. Yet, the fringe detail that haunts the edges of this discovery, beyond the sheer scale, is the architectural perfection and the anomalous demographic. The tower wasn't haphazard. The use of lime mortar to fuse the skulls into a permanent, unified structure suggests an intent far beyond temporary display. It was meant to last, to be a permanent fixture of the sacred landscape. Furthermore, the presence of women and juveniles defies the traditional narrative of the Tzompantli being solely populated by captured enemy warriors. Some unconventional researchers and decolonial scholars posit a more complex, unsettling interpretation. They suggest the structure may have served multiple purposes, part war monument, part ancestral veneration, and part catastrophic ritual during periods of extreme cosmic crisis, perhaps a drought or a predicted celestial event. The inclusion of women and the young might point to a concept of complete or balanced sacrificial offerings, representing the entire human community given back to the divine. A particularly haunting fringe theory, whispered in the corridors of alternative history, revolves around acoustics. The cylindrical form, the specific density and arrangement of the skulls and lime matrix might have been designed to capture and amplify sound. During certain rituals, with chants or drum beats at a specific frequency, the entire structure could have resonated, generating a low, subaudible hum, an infrasound known to induce feelings of dread, awe, and even visions. This sonic vibration would have physically shaken the spectators in the plaza, translating a spiritual concept into a visceral, bodily experience. The Tzompantli wouldn't just be seen, it would be felt, a trembling monolith making the fear and power of the state, and the gods, literally tangible. Scholars still debate whether the Huitzilopochtli was purely an instrument of psychological warfare and state terror, or something more profound and tragically alien to the modern mind. A deeply misunderstood engine in a cosmology where death was not a final end, but a transformative, generative force. Was it a brutal accounting of conquest, or a terrified people's attempt to literally build a bulwark of spiritual energy, a capacitor of soul stuff, against the impending chaos they sensed in their stars and their failing crops? The Spanish, of course, saw only demonic barbarism, a view that justified conquest and erasure. But looking at the neat, almost elegant rows of sockets where the poles once stood, one feels the chilling efficiency of belief. This was a society that applied its finest engineering, its most rigorous logistics, not just to aqueducts and palaces, but to the management of mortality itself. As the last light fades from the dig site each evening, casting long shadows across the neatly labelled bone fragments, the structure seems less a relic and more a profound, unanswered question. It asks what a civilization is willing to build and what materials it deems sacred when it becomes convinced that the survival of the entire world, the sun's very journey across the sky, hangs in the balance. The silence down there now is absolute, a stark contrast to the cacophony it once presided over. But the question it poses echoes upwards through the layers of earth and history. It is a question about the price of cosmic order, written in a language of calcium and mortar. And as we turn our gaze from this empire of the sun, soaked in the vivid hues of blood and gold, we must journey to a land stripped of all colour, to a realm of blinding white and endless cold. There, we will examine a document that defies time itself, a map that charts the impossible silhouette of a continent sheathed in ice, a coastline that, by all rights, should have remained hidden and unknown for millennia, waiting in the silence of a library for a modern eye to trace its forbidden contours. The Antarctic map that should not exist. That journey from the visceral, earthbound terror of the bone crypt leads us to a place of pure, sterile silence. Imagine the vast, white expanse of Antarctica, a continent of howling winds, where ice a mile thick cloaks mountains and carves deep hidden valleys. It is a land of perpetual winter, a frozen desert discovered by our conventional historical narrative only in the early 19th century. Now, hold that image of absolute, pristine isolation, and then place upon a worn wooden table in a library in Istanbul a map. Not a modern satellite chart, but a document drawn on gazelle skin parchment in the year 1513 by an Ottoman admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis. The map is a beautiful, sprawling artifact of the age of exploration, showing the coastlines of Europe, Africa, and the Americas, with the curious inaccuracies and inspired guesses of its time. But at its bottom edge, trailing off the parchment, as if the cartographer ran out of room or courage, is a landmass, a coastline, one that bears a chilling, impossible resemblance to the Queen Maud Land coast of Antarctica, but not as it appears under its glacial shroud. This map, the Piri Reis Map, appears to show Antarctica as it would look ice-free. The mainstream historical fact is the map itself, undeniably genuine, created in 1513 by Piri Reis, who wrote in the margins that he compiled it from 20 older source maps, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. He was a respected figure, a compiler of knowledge, not a fabricator. The map was rediscovered in 1,929 inches, the Topkapi Palace, causing an immediate sensation. The portion depicting South America is notably advanced for its time, but it is the southern land that ignites the enduring mystery. The coastline on the Piri Reis Map, with its bays, peninsulas, and river-like inlets, aligns with modern seismic surveys of the subglacial topography of Antarctica. These surveys, conducted in the mid-20th century using ground-penetrating radar and sonar, revealed the true shape of the continent beneath the ice, a shape that should have been utterly invisible to any human eye from the 16th century back to antiquity. The map seems to depict not the icy shore, but the actual bedrock coastline, a geography last exposed to the open air millions of years ago in a temperate age. This leads to the fringe detail, the tantalizing and terrifying implication. The source maps Piri Reis referenced. He claimed they included charts drawn by the infidels of China and, most provocatively, maps from the classical world, from the great Library of Alexandria itself. Could a lost civilization, possessing advanced seafaring and cartographic knowledge, have mapped a green Antarctica? The most radical proponents of this theory point to the works of ancient historians like Herodotus, who wrote of a legendary southern continent. They suggest a global, pre-Diluvian culture, perhaps the mythical Atlanteans, whose navigators charted the world in an ancient warm epoch, and whose fragmented knowledge survived in hidden libraries, eventually finding its way to Alexandria, and from there, centuries later, to the desk of an Ottoman admiral. It's a theory that rewrites human history, placing a sophisticated global network of explorers in a time we consider prehistoric. Yet, scholars still debate whether the southern landmass on the Piri Reis Map is Antarctica at all, or simply a speculative, distorted amalgamation of other southern lands, a misdrawn Tierra del Fuego, a fictional, great southern continent, Terra Australis Incognita, that cartographers had hypothesized for centuries, or even the coast of Patagonia, stretched and twisted to fit the edge of the known world. Skeptics argue that the alignment with the subglacial coast is coincidental, a classic case of apophenia, seeing meaningful patterns in random noise. They point out obvious errors on the map elsewhere and question the accuracy of the modern superimpositions. The debate is a microcosm of a greater tension between the romantic notion of lost golden ages and the rigorous, often incremental, process of orthodox history. Is the map a miraculous fragment of a forgotten epoch, or a beautiful, erroneous guess? The silence that surrounds this question is different from the silence of the Aztec crypt. It is the silence of a vast, white blank on an ancient chart, filled in by a hand that should have had no business knowing what lay there. It whispers of libraries burning, of scrolls turning to ash, of knowledge sinking beneath the waves. The Piri Reis Map is not an artifact of discovery, but of rediscovery, a ghost of a prior knowing. It suggests that our historical timeline is not a straight line of progress, but perhaps a spiral, where certain points of knowledge are reached, lost in the cold depths of time, and then, centuries later, faintly glimpsed again like a shape beneath ice. As we ponder this cartographic phantom, this frozen enigma, we must turn our attention to a discovery of a far more intimate, yet equally shocking, nature. It comes not from a vast continent or a grand library, but from a simple clay jar, unearthed in the dusty soil of Iraq. A vessel that, when opened, did not contain scrolls or gold, but something far more volatile, the ingredients for a storm in a bottle, a whisper of ancient lightning held captive in earth. The Baghdad vessel that held a storm. From the silent, grand mystery of a misplaced continent, we descend into the intimate confines of an artifact small enough to cradle in two hands. Our scene shifts to the hot, dusty outskirts of Baghdad in the 1,930 seconds. A team of workers is excavating a site for a new railway, their shovels slicing through layers of history in the rich Mesopotamian soil. Amidst the broken pottery and the detritus of centuries, one object is recovered intact. A simple, unassuming clay jar, roughly 6 inches tall. It is sealed with a stopper made of asphalt, and within it, a curious assembly is found: a copper cylinder, soldered with a lead-tin alloy, housing an iron rod. The jar dates from the Parthian period, sometime between 250 BC and 224 AD. To the untrained eye, it is a peculiar but mundane relic. But to the Austrian archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig, who examined it a few years later, it suggested something extraordinary. He proposed a theory so anachronistic it was dismissed for decades. The Baghdad Battery, as it came to be known, was an ancient galvanic cell, a primitive battery. The mainstream historical anchor is the object itself, housed today in the National Museum of Iraq. Its construction is deliberate and specific. The iron rod, isolated from the copper cylinder by the asphalt plug, would have acted as electrodes. If the jar were filled with an acidic or alkaline electrolyte, common substances like vinegar, grape juice, or even fermented grape syrup, it would have produced a measurable electrical charge, roughly 1 volt. Replicas have been built and tested, proving the concept feasible. While a single jar's output is small, linking several in a series, a battery of batteries could have generated a more significant voltage. This is not science fiction, but simple electrochemistry, accessible to the skilled metalworkers and alchemists of the Parthian or later Sasanian empires, who were renowned for their gilding and metal plating techniques. Here we find the quirky, fringe detail that transforms the artifact from a curious anomaly into a vessel of profound mystery. What was its purpose? Orthodox archaeology, skeptical of the battery thesis, long suggested it was simply a sacred scroll holder. But the presence of the asphalt seal, which would have contained corrosive electrolyte, argues against that. The fringe of archaeological speculation blooms with possibilities. Some researchers propose it was used for electroplating, to deposit a thin layer of gold or silver onto other metals. Small, intricately electroplated artifacts from the region do exist, though traditional fire gilding methods are also well documented. A more esoteric theory, however, ventures into the realm of medicine and mysticism. Ancient Greek and Roman texts describe the use of electric fish, like the torpedo ray, to numb pain. Could a priest-physician have used the mild, tingling current from such a jar for analgesic or ritualistic purposes? To a patient, the sensation of a low current applied to the skin would have felt like magic, a contained spirit, or a divine spark. The most haunting fringe possibility connects to the temple and the sacred. Imagine a statue of a god in a darkened shrine. If connected to a series of these jars, with copper and iron contacts hidden within the idol's mouth or eyes, a priest could, by completing a circuit, cause the statue to emit sparks or a faint glow in incense-heavy air. The miracle of a speaking god could be accompanied by a literal spark of divine presence. This would be a forbidden knowledge, indeed, the harnessing of a fundamental cosmic force for the theatre of faith, a secret held by a select few initiates to awe the populace and consolidate power. It is knowledge that flickers on the border of science and sorcery. Scholars still debate whether the Baghdad vessel was truly a battery at all. The lack of wires or conductors in the archaeological record is a frequent counterpoint. Perhaps it was, as some contend, merely a storage vessel for sacred scrolls, with the iron rod as a rusted core and the copper cylinder as a decorative sheath. Their electrochemical potential, an unintended coincidence of materials. The debate is a perfect storm of ambiguity. The evidence is just compelling enough to suggest possibility, yet just incomplete enough to deny certainty. It sits in that tantalizing archaeological twilight, where a single additional find, a connecting wire, a tablet describing its use, could rewrite chapters of technological history. But that find has never come. The jar, now silent and empty in its museum case, once potentially held a captive whisper of lightning. It represents not a grand public works project like a pyramid, but a small, clever, and possibly secretive discovery. It speaks of an experimenter in a quiet workshop, noticing the tingle on the tongue from dissimilar metals, and pursuing that sensation into a practical application. This is a different kind of forbidden knowledge, not the monumental, terrifying ritual of the Tzompantli, nor the world-spanning cartography hinted at by the Piri Reis Map, but a quiet, potent secret of the physical world. It is the kind of knowledge that, once stumbled upon, could be lost again just as easily, hidden in a cellar or buried with its maker. As we contemplate this contained storm, this ancient spark, our journey now pulls us away from the deserts of the Middle East, drawing us north and east, into the heart of a vast, frozen wilderness, to a place where the wind scours not sand but snow, and where another city, this one built not of bone or battery, but of luminous white marble waits, half remembered, in the mountain fastnesses, a ghost in the blizzard. The Siberian city that vanished into the snow. The quiet, electrochemical mystery of the Baghdad jar gives way to a landscape of overwhelming scale and silence. We travel now to the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, a realm where the horizon is a jagged line of snow-capped peaks, and the air is so clear and cold it feels like breathing glass. This is a land of nomadic herders, of forgotten trails, and of legends whispered around pine-fed fires. One such legend, persistent among the local Altai people, spoke of a hidden valley, a sacred place they called Belovodye, the White Waters, or White Land. It was described as a sanctuary of peace and ancient wisdom, but its location was a closely guarded secret, lost to time. For centuries, it was dismissed by outsiders as mere folklore, a Siberian Shangri-La. Then, in the late 20th century, aerial surveys and, later, satellite imagery revealed something extraordinary. On a remote plateau, near the borders of Kazakhstan and Mongolia, the land told a different story. Etched into the high steppe were the vast, geometric outlines of structures, perfect squares, rectangles, and concentric circles. visible only from the air or from space. This was Por-Bazhyn, the clay house, a fortress or monastery of stunning isolation, built not of clay, but of gleaming white marble and fired brick. The mainstream historical fact anchors this mystery in the 8th century AD. Radiocarbon dating and the architectural style point to the Uyghur Khaganate, a powerful Turkic empire that once rivaled Tang dynasty China and the Tibetan Empire. The Uyghurs were builders, Manichaeans, and sophisticated administrators. Por-Bazhyn, constructed around 777 AD, is a perfectly symmetrical rectangular complex covering nearly 7 acres, with walls 12 meters high, an outer gallery, a labyrinthine inner courtyard, and a central pavilion raised on an island in a now dry lake. It is a masterpiece of planning, built with millions of bricks carried to this remote, inhospitable height. Yet, the archaeological record holds a profound silence. There is scant evidence of long-term habitation. Very few everyday artifacts, tools, kitchenware, signs of hearths have been found. It appears the site was occupied only briefly, perhaps for a single generation, before being abandoned to the relentless elements. This leads us to the fringe detail, the enigma that hangs over the beautiful, empty ruins. Why was it built in such an impossibly inaccessible location? The plateau offers no strategic advantage, no farmland, no easy trade routes. The construction effort was Herculean, a logistical nightmare. Orthodox theories suggest it was a summer palace for a Uyghur Khagan or a Manichaean monastery, but the lack of everyday debris contradicts a thriving community. A more speculative, haunting theory arises from Uyghur history and the site's eerie character. Shortly after Por-Bazhyn's construction, the Uyghur Khaganate was shattered by a rebellion and a devastating famine. Some researchers, like archaeologist Dmitry Subeto, have posited a captivating, darker purpose. That Por-Bazhyn was not a palace or a monastery, but a mandala, a spiritual diagram built in the physical world. It may have been intended as a last-ditch ritual site, a geomantic instrument constructed at a place of immense natural power to stabilize a crumbling empire. Its symmetry, its isolation, its island within a lake design all mirror cosmic patterns in Manichaean and Buddhist thought. Was it a desperate attempt to build a fortress not against human armies, but against cosmic disorder? An even more esoteric fringe theory connects the white walls to the legends of Bellevodie and to older Scythian myths of hidden white kingdoms. Could Por-Bazhyn be a later, Uyghur iteration of a much older sacred site? The Altai Mountains are one of the proposed homelands of the Proto-Indo-Europeans. Some suggest the plateau was considered a thin place, a portal to other realms, and the Uyghurs built their structure to harness or guard that energy. The eerie lack of human residue, then, could be explained if the site was never meant for permanent living, but for periodic, high-level rituals conducted by a small priestly elite who then departed, sealing the gates behind them. The city wasn't abandoned. It was consecrated and left as a permanent offering, a frozen prayer in brick and marble. Scholars still debate whether Por-Bazhyn represents a failed colonial outpost, a spiritual retreat, or the architectural embodiment of a dying empire's final hope. The debate is complicated by the site's preservation in permafrost. Much of its secret may still lie frozen underground. Each summer thaw reveals a little more, but the central question persists. What profound belief or desperate fear could justify such a monumental effort in such a profoundly lonely place? It stands as a testament not to communal life, but to an idea so powerful it moved mountains of brick across greater mountains of stone. The wind that howls across the Por-Bazhyn plateau today is the same wind that once chilled the builders. It scours the white walls, which from a distance seem to shimmer like a mirage, a city of ice and bone. It is a place that feels less ruined than waiting. As we leave this silent, white fortress to its mountain fastness, we carry with us the theme of knowledge and its fragility. For the Uyghurs, their written records are lost. Their great capital, Ordu Balik, is a ruin. Their story is fragmentary. This brings us, inevitably, to the greatest single symbol of lost knowledge in the ancient world, a loss not from slow abandonment, but from a single, cataclysmic night of fire. We now turn our gaze to the sands of Egypt, to a place that was once the nucleus of all human understanding, and to the terrible, echoing emptiness left when it was consumed by its own forbidden flames. The Library of Ashes. In the desert, the haunting, isolated silence of the Siberian plateau finds its antithesis in the memory of a place that was once the very epicenter of human noise. The clamor of ideas, the rustle of papyrus, the debates of philosophers in sun-drenched colonnades. We arrive in Alexandria, Egypt, in the 3rd century AD. Not the modern city, but the brilliant, turbulent metropolis of late antiquity, a jewel of the Roman Empire. At its heart, in the Baghdad district, stood a mythic institution, the Great Library of Alexandria. More than a library, it was the Mauseon, the Temple of the Muses, the world's first true research university. Its founding, under Ptolemy I Soter in the early 3rd century BC, was an act of intellectual audacity. The goal was nothing less than to collect all the world's knowledge. Ships entering the harbour were boarded, their scrolls confiscated, copied by an army of scribes, and the copies returned. Originals were kept for the library's stacks. It housed works from the farthest reaches of the known world: Persian astrological treatises, Indian mathematical texts, the complete works of the Greek dramatists, histories of Phoenicia, and anatomical studies from Babylon. It was a universe of vellum and ink. The mainstream historical fact is the library's devastating, and still controversial, destruction. The narrative is clouded by time and political blame, but the primary culprit in the ancient accounts is Julius Caesar. During the Alexandrian War in 48 BC, besieged in the palace quarter, Caesar ordered his men to set fire to the Egyptian fleet in the harbour. The fires, according to the Roman historian Seneca and others, spread to the warehouses and dockside buildings, consuming a vast number of scrolls stored there, perhaps a secondary repository or annex of the Great Library itself. This was a catastrophic loss, but not the final one. The library, as an institution, declined over centuries through neglect, purges, and further violence during Rome's civil wars and the rise of Christian religious fervour. The final, symbolic death blow is often attributed to the decree of Coptic Christian Pope Theophilus in 391 AD, who ordered the destruction of the pagan Serapeum temple, which may have held the last remaining collection. The story is one of death by 1,000 cuts, a slow extinguishing of the light. But the quirky, fringe detail lies not just in the destruction, but in the whispered contents of those lost scrolls. What precisely went up in smoke? Beyond the known works of Greek philosophy, the library was said to hold forbidden knowledge. Legends speak of a book of Thoth, containing the secrets of the gods themselves. It was rumoured to house the complete history of Atlantis, recorded by Egyptian priests from a far older time. Maps of the world that included Antarctica and the Americas, treatises on alchemy that detailed the true secrets of transmutation, engineering principles for machines powered by steam or water that would not be reinvented for over a millennium. Medical knowledge, perhaps even rudimentary germ theory or surgical techniques, lost to the Dark Ages. The library's destruction represents the annihilation of potential parallel paths of human development. What if a treatise on Antikythera-like mechanisms survived to guide Renaissance engineers? What if a text on the electrical properties of metals, like that hinted at by the Baghdad Battery, had been studied and expanded upon? The burning of the library is the central trauma of Western knowledge, a recurring nightmare of what might have been. This leads to the most poignant fringe theory of all, that the library's true, core collection was not destroyed, but hidden. In the chaos of the Roman or later Muslim conquests, could a cadre of scholar priests have smuggled the most precious scrolls into underground chambers beneath the city or the desert? The idea of a hidden, surviving archive fuels endless speculation and futile digs. It suggests that the sum of ancient wisdom is not ash, but merely sleeping, waiting for a key to be turned in a long-forgotten lock. This theory transforms the tragedy from an end into a perpetual, aching suspense. Scholars still debate the scale, timing, and even the precise location of the destruction, arguing over how much was lost at any single event. Some modern historians posit that the library's decline was so gradual that much of its knowledge had already been dispersed, copied, and preserved in other centres like Constantinople or Baghdad by the time of its final ruin. But this academic debate does little to quell the powerful mythos. The Library of Alexandria is less a historical institution and more a symbol of the fragility of human understanding, of how easily the accumulated light of centuries can be snuffed out by the casual brutality of war, the slow creep of dogma, or the simple, devastating accident of a stray spark in a dry dockyard. The smoke from that ancient fire, real or metaphorical, still lingers in our cultural memory. It is a reminder that every scroll, every book, every hard drive is a votive candle held against a vast darkness. The loss invites a terrifying question. What forbidden insights, what world-altering discoveries did we as a species have in our hands, only to let them crumble to dust or burn to nothing? As we sit in the long shadow of that Alexandrian twilight, we are left to wonder what other fragments of the ancient world might have escaped the flames, only to turn up in the most unexpected of places, not in old world libraries, but in the virgin soil of a continent that, according to all our textbooks, those ancient civilizations could never have known. The Roman artifacts in the New World's soil, the spectre of the library's ashes, of knowledge scattered and lost, sets the stage for a discovery that seems to defy the very map of history we have so carefully drawn. We leave the Mediterranean world behind, crossing the vast, windy expanse of the Atlantic, and find ourselves not in a grand city, but in a quiet, rural field. The year is 1933. The place is a farm near Mexico City, at a site called Calixtlahuaca, once a Matlatzinca settlement, later absorbed by the Aztec Empire. A Mexican archaeologist, José García Payón, is carefully excavating a burial offering dating to a pre-Hispanic level, sometime between 1476 and 1510 AD. Among the typical local artifacts, obsidian blades, ceramic figurines, his trowel uncovers something that makes no sense. It is a small terracotta head, barely 2 inches tall, depicting a man with a full beard and a distinct, stylized hairstyle. The features are not Mesoamerican. They are unmistakably, classically Roman. It wears a pileus, a pointed cap associated with freed slaves in the Roman world. The Tecaxic Calixtlahuaca head had been buried in a sealed, undisturbed archaeological layer centuries before Columbus set sail. This mainstream historical fact is the bedrock of a profound anomaly. The head has been analysed repeatedly. Thermoluminescence, dating in the 1990 seconds, confirmed the artifact's antiquity, placing its firing between the 9th century BC and the mid-13th century AD, a range that comfortably includes the height of the Roman Empire. Stylistically, it is a perfect match for Roman terracotta figurines of the 2nd or 3rd century AD. It was not a later colonial import. It was found in a context that predates the Spanish arrival by generations. The head is real, it is old, and it was dug from ancient Mexican soil. This single, tiny object throws a wrench into the smooth narrative of transoceanic contact, whispering of a far earlier, forgotten voyage. The quirky, the fringe detail here is not just the head's existence, but the chorus of other anomalous, out-of-place artifacts, ooparts, that seem to echo its impossible message. A Roman-era amphora salvaged from a bay in Brazil. A Roman sword allegedly found in Oak Island, Nova Scotia. Carthaginian coins reported in the Americas. While many of these have questionable provenance or have been debunked, the Calixtlahuaca head retains a stubborn scientific credibility that keeps the door ajar. How did it get there? The fringe theories bloom like strange flowers. One suggests a Roman vessel, perhaps blown off course from a trade route along the African coast, caught in the westward currents and equatorial winds that we know can, with a measure of disaster and luck, carry a ship to the New World. The survivors, if any, would have been a handful of confused, stranded sailors, their technology and culture quickly absorbed or lost, leaving only a few scattered artifacts as cryptic evidence of their tragic journey. A more radical theory reaches back to the lost knowledge we contemplated earlier. Could the Romans, or their Carthaginian predecessors, have possessed maps or sailing directions passed down from the era of the Library of Alexandria, charts that hinted at lands across the Atlantic? The Roman writer Plutarch, in his work De Facie in Orbe Lunae, describes a great continent beyond the Atlantic, reached by sailors who pass a Cronian sea of thick, slushy ice, a description some interpret as the Sargasso Sea and the North Atlantic Drift. Was this philosophical speculation, or a garbled account of a real secret trade route? The fringe idea posits not a shipwreck, but a sporadic, intentional contact, perhaps for resources like tin or medicinal plants, knowledge of which was held by a small guild of merchants and lost with the empire's collapse. Scholars still debate whether the head is a genuine pre-Columbian find or an elaborate, if unintentional, hoax, perhaps a Roman artifact from a European collection. that somehow intruded into the archaeological layer, though the sealed context argues strongly against this. The academic world, bound by Occam's razor, largely dismisses it as an anomaly without a narrative, a statistical outlier in the vast dataset of archaeology. But its very existence is a pebble in the shoe of history, a persistent, uncomfortable presence that challenges our certainty. It asks us to consider the vastness of the oceans and the 2,000-year span of the Roman Empire, and to wonder if, in all that time and space, not a single ship, not one, ever made that fateful crossing and left a trace. This small, bearded face, smiling enigmatically from under its pointed cap, embodies a different kind of forbidden discovery. It is not a grand, purposeful artifact like a battery or a map, but a piece of mundane, personal or devotional art. Its power lies in its domestic normalcy. It suggests that if contact occurred, it was not the arrival of gods or conquistadors, but of ordinary, lost people. As we ponder this intimate, transatlantic ghost, we are pulled back to the old world, to the bed of the Mediterranean itself. For there, in the silent blue darkness off a Greek island, another discovery was made, one not of human contact, but of a mechanical complexity so advanced it seems to have fallen from the stars, a clockwork oracle resting in the wreckage of a ship for 2,000 years. The sunken clockwork of Antikythera, the quiet mystery of a single terracotta head, a solitary traveller out of time, gives way to a discovery of such layered, intricate complexity that it seems to hum with a different frequency of intelligence. Our scene descends from the dry soil of Mexico to the sun-dappled, deceptive peace of the Aegean Sea. The year is 1900, the location is the treacherous waters off the tiny Greek island of Antikythera. A group of sponge divers, seeking refuge from a storm, decide to explore the depths. Plummeting down through 60 meters of crystalline water, they are met not by sponges, but by a haunting vista, a scattered field of marble and bronze statues emerging from the silt, the ghostly limbs of gods and horses, the silent faces of philosophers, all guarding the remains of a Roman cargo ship that sank around 70 to 60 BC. It is an archaeologist's dream, the first great ancient shipwreck ever systematically excavated. Among the expected treasures, the exquisite Antikythera youth statue, glassware, coins, a diver surfaces with what appears to be a lump of corroded, greenish rock. It is unremarkable, set aside with the other less glamorous finds. Months later, as it dries and cracks, a glint of metal is seen inside. Brushing away the calcareous crust, a technician reveals a geared wheel, then another, and another. The Antikythera mechanism, as it would be named, was no rock. It was a machine. The mainstream historical fact, established through over a century of painstaking analysis using ever more advanced technology, like 3D X-ray tomography, is that the mechanism is the world's oldest known analog computer. Housed in a wooden case the size of a shoebox, it consisted of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, meticulously cut by hand, and front and back dials marked with intricate Greek inscriptions. It was a portable, hand-cranked cosmos. By turning a handle, one could calculate the positions of the sun and moon, predict lunar and solar eclipses, track the cycles of the Pan-Hellenic Games, like the Olympics, and even model the irregular orbit of the moon, a complexity not matched until the mechanical clocks of the 14th century, over a millennium later. It is a singular artifact of Greek astronomy and engineering, likely from the school of Rhodes, a working demonstration of the heliocentric theories of Hipparchus, built when the Roman Republic was at its height. This is where the quirky, fringe detail takes root, not in denying its Hellenistic origin, but in asking the terrifying question that hangs behind it. How alone was it? The mechanism's sophistication implies a tradition. One does not go from simple water clocks to a differential gear overnight. The precision of its gear teeth, the understanding of astronomical cycles encoded in its ratios, speaks of a lineage of instrument makers, a craft that has left no other trace in the archaeological record. Was the Antikythera mechanism a one-off masterpiece from a genius's workshop, or was it a product of a minor but established industry of orrery makers, all of whose other works were melted down for their bronze, lost in other wrecks, or simply crumbled to dust? The fringe theory whispers that it may represent a branch of Greek mechanics that was actively suppressed. Knowledge this powerful, the ability to predict eclipses, to map the heavens, was the province of the temple and the state, a device that democratized this celestial knowledge, that put the predictive power of the gods into a box anyone could turn, might have been seen as dangerously subversive, a forbidden technology. A more speculative leap wonders about its influences and its potential. The inscriptions reference Babylonian eclipse cycles and Egyptian calendars, showing a synthesis of Mediterranean knowledge. Could its principles have travelled even farther? Some see echoes of its complex gearing in descriptions of legendary devices, like the automated wonders said to have been in the Library of Alexandria. Did Archimedes, whose lost manuscripts were on the Roman ship that may have also carried this mechanism, design similar machines for Syracuse? The mechanism is a physical proof that the ancient world was capable of a technological sophistication we had never imagined. It forces us to re-evaluate every mythic automaton, every tale of moving statues and magical doors in ancient temples. Were they mere legend, or garbled accounts of real, though rare, mechanical art? Scholars still debate the mechanism's primary purpose. Was it a teaching tool for philosophers, a rich man's dazzling toy, a navigational aid, though its use at sea is debated, or an astrologer's professional device for casting horoscopes? The debate reflects our own struggle to categorize it. It blurs every line between science and magic, between tool and talisman. To a Greek, those lines may not have existed. The mechanism was a physical incarnation of a beautiful, ordered cosmos, a tiny, ticking model of divine harmony. Its very existence is a profound shock to our linear view of technological progress, presenting a stark, sunken pinnacle that was not climbed again for over 1,000 years. The silence that surrounds the Antikythera mechanism is not the silence of abandonment, like Por-Bazhyn, but the silence of a conversation that was happening and then abruptly stopped. The water that filled its wooden case also flooded a whole stream of potential inquiry. As we surface from those Aegean depths, our minds reeling from the precision of those bronze gears, we are drawn to another discovery where metal was used not to mirror the heavens, but to adorn the human form in a way that defies simple explanation. We travel now to the arid coast of Peru, to a tomb where death was not met with simple mourning, but with a stunning surgical metallurgy that left skulls weeping delicate, forbidden tears of pure gold. The Peruvian skulls with the golden tears. The precise, celestial mechanics of the Antikythera device, a testament to the Greek mind's desire to model the cosmos, stands in stark contrast to a discovery that speaks to a more visceral, bodily intimacy with eternity. We journey now from the blue Aegean to the tawny, coastal deserts of Peru, a land shaped by the Pachacamac and later the Sican, or Lambayeque cultures, predecessors to the mighty Inca. Here, in the late 20th century, archaeologists excavating the tombs of the elite at sites like Huacaloro made a find that was both macabre and mesmerizing. Within the burial chambers of lords and priests, they uncovered skulls that were not simply adorned with gold, they were physically transformed by it. The eye sockets of these carefully prepared craniums did not hold precious stones or shell inlays. Instead, from within the orbital cavity, delicate, spool-like ornaments of hammered gold were inserted. But more astonishingly, from the base of the nasal aperture, where the septum and palate meet, a slender, rolled sheet of gold was expertly inserted, emerging from the skull to dangle down like a single, shining teardrop or a thin metallic tongue. These were the golden tears of the Sican lords, a funerary practice of breathtaking technical and symbolic complexity. The mainstream historical fact anchors this practice to the Middle Sican period, approximately 900 to 1100 AD. The Sican were master metallurgists, whose capital, Batan Grande, was a veritable furnace of gold, silver, and copper alloy production. Their society was deeply theocratic, centered on the worship of the Sican deity, often depicted as a masked figure with upturned wing-like eyes. The placement of gold in the skull was no haphazard act of wealth display. It was a systematic, ritualized procedure. After death, the base of the skull was often carefully cut to remove the brain, and the foramen magnum enlarged. The facial tissue and eyes were likely removed. The gold ocular ornaments and the nasal pendant were then fitted. This was followed by the application of a red cinnabar paste over the skull, and sometimes the fitting of a gold mask. The body was then seated in a deep shaft tomb, surrounded by staggering wealth in precious metals and textiles. The tear was a permanent metallic alteration of the body itself, meant to endure for eternity. This leads us to the fringe detail, the profound why that lingers like the ghost of the metal itself. What was the belief that drove such a specific, invasive practice? Orthodox interpretation suggests the gold was meant to transform the deceased into a divine being, with shining, imperishable eyes and breath. The nasal pendant could represent a golden breath, a life force made eternal and precious. But a more esoteric theory delves into the symbolic anatomy of the skull. In Andean cosmology, the head was the seat of Camaquén, the vital force. The eyes were portals. By sealing these portals with gold, the priests may have been performing a kind of metaphysical embalming, locking the Camaquén inside the indestructible skull, preventing its dissipation. The tear from the nose, a cavity associated with breath, spirit, and even speech, might have been a conduit, a golden straw through which the ancestors' essence could both be contained and could symbolically drink offerings poured into the tomb. A more fringe, alchemical line of thought considers the material itself. Gold, to the Sican, was not currency. It was the sweat of the sun, the tears of the moon. It was divine excrement, a sacred substance with innate life and power. Inserting it into the very bone was perhaps an attempt to catalyze a transformation from within, to literally turn the corruptible flesh of the mortal into the incorruptible substance of the gods, starting at the core, at the seat of identity. This was not adornment, it was transubstantiation via metallurgy. The skull became a crucible, and the funeral rite a final, transformative smelting process. Some researchers have even noted that the specific placement might correspond to acupuncture or energy points known in other ancient traditions, suggesting a lost map of the body's spiritual anatomy unique to the Andes. Scholars still debate whether this practice was reserved for the divine ruler himself, the living embodiment of the Sican deity, or for a broader class of high priests and nobility. The debate touches on the very nature of Sican kingship. Was the ruler so sacred that his physical remains had to be actively deified through this metallurgical process? Or was this a more widespread technique to create a class of powerful ancestral mummies who could intercede from the underworld? The silence of the tombs is absolute on this point. The skulls, with their vacant golden eyes, offer no answer, only an intense, unwavering stare that seems to look through millennia. These craniums, now resting in climate-controlled museum cases, represent a forbidden knowledge of a different order. It is not the knowledge of astronomy or engineering, but of a profound, unsettling intimacy between the mortal body and the immortal metal. It is a knowledge that saw no stark divide between the organic and the mineral, between death and a different kind of life. As we break our gaze from those shining, tear-stained sockets, we turn to another metal that defies time, not through ritual insertion, but through its stubborn, quiet refusal to succumb to the elements. Our journey takes us across the Pacific, to the sweltering plains of India, where a pillar of iron has stood for 16 centuries, exposed to monsoon rains and scorching sun, without a single speck of rust, a sentinel of a lost science, waiting patiently in a courtyard. The Indian pillar that defies rust. The Sican lord's golden tears speak of a metallurgy dedicated to transcendence, to escaping decay through sacred transformation. In the heart of India, we encounter a monument to a metallurgy that achieved a similar defiance of nature, not through ritual, but through what seems like sheer, stubborn material perfection. In the Qutb complex in Delhi, amidst the ruins of Quwwat-ul-Islam Mosque and the towering shadow of the Qutb Minar, stands an object that seems almost humble in its simplicity. It is an iron pillar, over 7 meters tall, crowned with a stylized bell capital and ancient Sanskrit inscriptions. It is known as the Iron Pillar of Delhi, and it was erected in the 4th or 5th century AD, originally in a temple complex to the Hindu god Vishnu, possibly in present-day Madhya Pradesh, before being moved to Delhi centuries later. For over 1600 years, through the relentless humidity of monsoon seasons and the pollution of the modern era, this pillar of wrought iron has stood in the open air, and it has not rusted. The mainstream historical fact is the pillar's composition and its clear, devotional purpose. The inscription, a eulogy to a king named Chandra, likely the Gupta monarch Chandragupta II, celebrates his victories and his piety. The pillar itself is a testament to the advanced state of Indian ironworking in the Gupta period, often called a golden age of science and art. It is made of remarkably pure wrought iron, estimated at over 98% iron, forged from a series of hot-work discs or blooms hammered together. Its sheer size and craftsmanship are staggering, but its true marvel is its passive stability. A thin, dark blue-grey protective layer, just microns thick, has formed on its surface. This layer, primarily composed of iron hydrogen phosphate hydrate, acts as a barrier, preventing the electrochemical reactions that cause rust. It is a self-repairing patina, a gift of time and chemistry. This is where the quirky, fringe detail emerges, swirling around the question of intent. Did the ancient Indian Lohakaras, ironworkers, understand the precise alchemy that would create this eternal pillar? Orthodox materials science suggests the anti-corrosive layer was a happy accident. The high purity of the iron, the particular slag inclusions, especially phosphorus, which is unusually high due to the unique iron ores and charcoal-based smelting process, and over a millennium of exposure to the specific conditions in its original and Delhi locations conspired to form this unique protective film. It was, in this view, a magnificent coincidence. The fringe theory, however, leans into the sophisticated knowledge systems of ancient India, documented in texts like the Artha Shastra and various Shilpa Shastras, treatises on arts and crafts. Could there have been a lost rasayana, alchemical process, a specific ritualized forging technique, or a deliberate surface treatment using plant or mineral extracts that induced this passive layer? Was the pillar's endurance not an accident, but the ultimate goal, a symbol of a king's eternal glory and divine sanction, made literal in imperishable metal? A more speculative notion connects the pillar to concepts of sacred geometry and earth energies. Its original location at a Vishnu temple was not random. Some researchers of archaeometallurgy and alternative history suggest that the pillar's composition and placement might have been designed to interact with the local geomagnetic field or telluric currents. The high phosphorus content, they argue, might have been deliberately engineered not just for physical properties, but for conductive or capacitive ones, turning the pillar into a sort of energy antenna or ground. Its resistance to rust, in this view, is a side effect of a more profound, forgotten purpose, perhaps to stabilize the spiritual energy of the site, much like a metaphysical lightning rod. It stands not just as a monument, but as a functional, ancient technological artifact in a system of knowledge we no longer comprehend. Scholars still debate whether the pillar's resilience is a testament to deliberate ancient mastery or a serendipitous convergence of material science and environmental conditions. The debate often mirrors a larger cultural conversation about ancient Indian knowledge. How much was precise science, and how much was inspired craft guided by tradition and observation? The pillar refuses to answer. It simply stands, cool to the touch even under the blistering sun, its surface smooth and uncorrupted, where centuries of hands have touched it for luck or out of awe. It is a quiet, persistent rebuke to the idea that all things must oxidize and return to the earth. The iron pillar's silent endurance offers a different narrative of forbidden knowledge. It is not about a shocking ritual or a map to unseen lands, but about a mastery of the mundane, of the very substance from which tools and weapons are made. It suggests a pinnacle of practical craft that was perhaps never surpassed, a recipe or technique that vanished into the collective unconscious of the smiths' guilds, leaving behind only this one perfect specimen as proof it was ever possible. As we leave this sentinel of iron in its crowded Delhi courtyard, we are drawn to a far more primal, more universal form of human expression, one found not in forged metal, but in the simple impression of a hand on a stone wall. But these are not just any hands. They are a multitude, a frozen chorus from the deepest cold of the ancient world, pressed in desperation or reverence onto the walls of a cave at the very edge of the habitable earth. The cave of 1,000 hands in the Arctic. The silent, metallic permanence of the Delhi pillar gives way to a testimony written in the most transient of mediums, the human body itself and the crushing, eternal cold. Our journey now turns to one of the most inhospitable regions on the planet, the Siberian Arctic, specifically the Yamal Peninsula, a vast, flat tundra where winter darkness reigns for months and the ground is permanently frozen. Here, in 1965, a Soviet geologist named Yuri Baryshnikov was surveying the barren landscape when he discovered the entrance to a cavern, not of rock, but of ice and permafrost. This was the Ignatievka Cave, also known as Ignatievskaya Cave, and its interior held a shock that transcended its remote location. The walls were covered, not with the expected depictions of mammoths or bison common to European caves, but with something more abstract, more immediate, and somehow more haunting. Hundreds upon hundreds of red ochre handprints and palm prints. Stencils made by people placing their hands against the wall and blowing pigment over them, leaving a ghostly negative image. A chorus of hands, waving from across a gulf of nearly 12,000 years. The mainstream historical fact, established through radiocarbon dating of the pigments and archaeological layers, places the creation of these prints in the Upper Paleolithic, around 10,000 to 8,000 BC. The artists were likely the ancestors of today's Uralic and Siberian peoples, hunter-gatherers surviving in an environment at the very limit of human endurance. The cave itself is a spiritual locus, used for millennia. Later, in the Iron Age, it was used for burials, and even into the 19th century, local Mansi people considered it a sacred site. But the oldest layer, the most profound, is this field of hands. Alongside them are simple geometric shapes, lines, dots, lattices, and a few ambiguous animal figures. This is not classic representational art. It is something more primal, a direct, physical claim of presence. I was here. My hand touched this stone. The quirky fringe detail lies in the composition of the prints themselves and their eerie arrangement. Anthropologists have noted a startling pattern. A significant number of the hands appear to be missing fingers or show distorted phalanges. The conventional explanation is that the artists simply folded their fingers during the stenciling process to create symbolic signs, or that the missing digits are a result of deliberate cultural mutilation, perhaps as a rite of passage or mourning, a practice known from some other ancient cultures. However, a more speculative and chilling theory has been proposed by researchers like archaeologist Dr. Vladislav Zhitnikov, that the distortions are not symbolic, but literal. These hunters lived in a subarctic environment where frostbite was a constant, deadly threat. The handprints, in this reading, are not just signatures, but medical records, votive offerings from those who had sacrificed parts of their bodies to the cold. They pressed their maimed, surviving hands to the wall as a testament to their endurance, a plea for healing, or a way to leave the pain and the cold behind in the sacred dark, transferring their suffering into the earth. This leads to an even deeper fringe concept, that the cave was not just a gallery, but a sanctuary of sympathetic magic of the most urgent kind. In the perpetual winter dark, the loss of sunlight and heat is a psychological and physical trauma. The red ochre, the colour of blood and life, sprayed over the hands and onto the walls, could have been a ritual to summon warmth, to symbolically recharge the life force that the cold was leaching away. The sheer density of prints suggests generations return to this same spot to perform this same act, layering their presence over their ancestors. The cave becomes a communal battery for warmth and vitality, its walls storing the psychic and physical imprint of a people constantly battling extinction. The geometric patterns might then be maps of migratory routes, star charts for the endless night, or diagrams of traps' vital survival knowledge rendered in a sacred context. Scholars still debate whether the Ignatievka handprints represent a single, protracted ritual event or an accretion over centuries, and whether the missing fingers are artistic convention, deliberate mutilation, or evidence of Paleolithic pathology. The debate is fraught because it touches on the fundamental nature of these ancient minds. Were they engaging in pure symbolism, or were their rituals desperate, practical interventions in a hostile universe? The cave offers no narrative, only the silent, shouting evidence of the hands themselves, a democracy of the ancient and the cold. The feeling inside Ignatievka Cave is not one of aesthetic wonder, as in Lascaux, but of profound intimacy and vulnerability. It is the opposite of the grand, imperial statement of the Iron Pillar. This is humanity at its most fragile, leaving the only permanent mark it could, the shape of its own body, fragile and maimed against the immortal ice. It is a forbidden discovery because it exposes not the grandeur of lost kings, but the raw, trembling reality of human survival. It shows us that the earliest forbidden knowledge may not have been of stars or metals, but of how to plead with the darkness, how to say, "We are still here," when the world seems intent on erasing you. And as we step back from that frozen, tactile chorus, we are confronted by another kind of handprint, one not pressed in pigment, but drawn in ink on vellum. It is a handprint of the mind, a sprawling, beautiful, and utterly indecipherable manuscript that has circled the globe, containing a language of plants and stars that no one, for centuries, has been able to read. The manuscript no one can read. The primal, physical plea of the Arctic handprints, a language of presence anyone can understand, leads us to an artifact that represents the absolute extreme of cryptic communication. It is a book that contains a world, but one locked behind a door for which no key has been found. Our scene is a vault at Yale University's Beinecker Rare Book and Manuscript Library, though its journey there was centuries long and shrouded in obscurity. The object is the Voynich manuscript. It is a small, palm-sized codex of about 240 vellum pages, filled from edge to edge with a flowing, unknown script, written left to right in a confident hand. Its pages are illuminated with bizarre, colourful illustrations. Unfamiliar plants with bulbous roots and strange leaves, naked women bathing in interconnected green-tinted pools and tubes, astrological diagrams featuring unknown constellations, and intricate, cosmological wheels that seem to chart impossible systems. Carbon dated to the early 15th century, 1404 to 1438, and first firmly documented in the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II in Prague, around 1600. The manuscript is an enigma wrapped in a mystery. It has resisted the efforts of the world's greatest cryptographers, linguists, and mathematicians, from Elizabethan magicians to modern AI algorithms. The mainstream historical fact is the manuscript's physical and provenance mystery. The vellum is genuine, the ink is period appropriate. Its known history begins with Rudolf II, who reportedly purchased it for 600 gold ducats, an enormous sum, indicating it was considered a work of profound, if secret, importance. It passed through alchemists and collectors, including the Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher, before vanishing and resurfacing in 1912, when Polish book dealer Wilfrid Voynich bought it from a Jesuit college, lending it his name. The text demonstrates statistical properties of a real language word, entropy, Zipf's law distribution, yet it corresponds to no known tongue, past or present. The illustrations are equally baffling. The plants are botanical chimeras, combining features of species from different continents. The bathing women scenes are unlike any known medical or balneological treatise. The astronomy ignores classical Ptolemaic models. It is a system entire of itself, and yet it feels coherent, purposeful. This is the fertile ground for quirky, fringe details and theories. The most persistent fringe idea is that it is a constructed, synthetic language, an early attempt at a philosophical or universal language meant to encode concepts rather than phonetic speech. Perhaps it was the secret notebook of a Renaissance heretic or proto-scientist, recording forbidden knowledge about nature, medicine, and the cosmos in a code to avoid persecution. Another theory, now largely debunked but poetically resonant, claimed it was the work of a 13th century Franciscan friar and natural philosopher, Roger Bacon, using a revolutionary cipher. More exotic suggestions range from it being a linguistic hoax created by Voynich himself, though the carbon dating disproves this, to it being the sole surviving document of a lost culture, or even the most fantastical, an artifact of extraterrestrial origin, or a message from the future. A compelling and more recent fringe theory, proposed by researchers like Arthur Tucker and Rexford Talbot, suggests the manuscript's mystery is botanical, not linguistic. They argue that many of the unidentifiable plants are not fantastical, but accurate depictions of New World flora, specifically from the region of New Spain, Mexico. Plants resembling a soap vine, Ipomoea arborescens, a Mexican sunflower, Tithonia diversifolia, and others appear in the drawings. If correct, this would mean the manuscript postdates Columbus's voyages and could be a coded record of Aztec or other Mesoamerican knowledge, compiled by a Spanish or indigenous scribe for a European patron fascinated by the exotic materia medica of the New World. This would make it a unique, encrypted biopiracy document, preserving native knowledge even as it was being physically destroyed by conquest. Scholars still debate whether the Voynich manuscript is an elaborate but meaningless forgery, a postmodern hoax centuries before its time, a ciphertext for which the key is lost, or a document in a genuine but extinct natural language or constructed script. The debate is perhaps the most pure in all of historical inquiry, as it is entirely about pattern recognition and interpretation, unburdened by confirming external facts. It is a mirror that reflects the observer's desires. Cryptographers see a code, linguists see a language, historians see a hoax, mystics see a grimoire. Its enduring power lies in its silence. It is the ultimate forbidden discovery, because it withholds its own secret completely. It offers everything a lush, illustrated world, and nothing at all. The manuscript sits in its climate-controlled case, a closed circuit of meaning. It is the antithesis of the Ignatievka handprints. Where the hands scream, "I am here," the Voynich whispers, "You cannot know me." It represents the terrifying possibility that some knowledge is so specific, so tied to a single mind or a lost context, that it becomes permanently orphaned, a beautiful, impenetrable artifact drifting through time. As we finally look away from its hypnotic, uncanny pages, we are drawn to a different kind of sealed secret, one not locked in cipher, but in lore and tradition. It is a tomb, massive and imposing, shaped like a keyhole, resting in the heart of modern Japan. It is so forbidden that even emperors bow to its mystery, leaving its contents, potentially holding the very origins of a nation, deliberately and permanently unknown. The Japanese tomb under the emperor's seal, the silent, textual labyrinth of the Voynich manuscript, a puzzle of human invention, gives way to a mystery enforced not by lost ciphers, but by living, breathing tradition and imperial decree. We travel to the verdant plains of Sakai in Osaka Prefecture, Japan. Here, amidst suburban streets and quiet neighborhoods, rises a form so large it can only be comprehended from the air, the Daisen Kofun. It is a tomb, or kofun, of the keyhole variety, a massive, rounded mound connected to a trapezoidal front, creating a shape reminiscent of a giant keyhole or a light bulb, enclosed by triple moats and covered in dense forest. It is the largest tomb in the world by area, surpassing even the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is believed to be the final resting place of the semi-legendary Emperor Nintoku, who reigned in the early 5th century AD, a time when Japan was coalescing from warring clans into a centralized state. And since 1976, by order of the Imperial Household Agency, it has been strictly, utterly off-limits to archaeological excavation. It is a forbidden discovery in potentia, a treasure trove of proto-Japanese history locked under an emperor's seal. The mainstream historical fact is the tomb's scale and its place in the Kofun period, c. 250 to 538 AD. Over 160,000 such mounds dot Japan, but the Daisen Kofun is the apogee. It is 486 meters long, 305 meters wide at its broadest point, and covers 46 hectares. Its construction would have required the labor of thousands for decades, a staggering display of the early Yamato dynasty's power. The keyhole shape is uniquely Japanese, its meaning debated but generally associated with supreme authority, possibly representing a union of the round, heaven, and square, earth, forms found in Chinese cosmology. The moats, now still and reflective, were both defensive and profoundly symbolic, separating the sacred realm of the dead emperor from the profane world of the living. The tomb is not just a burial, it is a permanent, geographical statement of divine kingship. This leads us to the quirky, fringe detail not about what is inside, for we do not know, but about the potent, living taboo that keeps it sealed. The Imperial Household Agency manages all imperial graves as private property of the royal family, and, more importantly, as sacred reijin, spirit pacification sites. To excavate would be to disturb the slumber of a divine ancestor, an act of profound spiritual pollution and disrespect. This is a powerful, culturally specific form of forbidden knowledge. The knowledge is not lost, but deliberately set aside, its pursuit considered more harmful than its possession could be beneficial. It is a voluntary amnesia in the name of piety and social stability. Yet, this very prohibition fuels intense speculation. What lies in the central stone chamber? Orthodox archaeology, based on smaller, excavated kofun, suggests a coffin, possibly of wood or stone, surrounded by grave goods, iron swords and armor, gilt bronze horse trappings, comma-shaped jewels, magatama, and the iconic Haniwa clay figurines that stood guard on the slopes. But for an emperor of Nintoku's purported stature, the treasures would be of unimaginable richness and historical significance. The fringe theories, therefore, spin in the vacuum of fact. Some suggest the tomb could hold evidence of the deep connections between the early Japanese elite and the Korean peninsula, perhaps even regalia from the Korean kingdom of Baghdad, which had close ties to the Yamato. Others, whisper of artifacts that could challenge the official narrative of Japan's unbroken imperial line, or of written records on wood or metal that could finally provide a factual history of the shadowy 5th century, a period reliant on later, mythologized chronicles like the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki. A more esoteric theory, playing on the tomb's keyhole shape, posits that it is not merely symbolic, but functional, a giant geomantic anchor designed to harness earth energies to protect and nurture the imperial lineage. Excavation, in this view, wouldn't just be disrespectful, it would be spiritually dangerous, disrupting forces that have been in balance for 1,600 years. Scholars still debate whether the occupant is truly Emperor Nintoku, as tradition holds, or another powerful chieftain. They debate the potential historical value of excavation against the undeniable cultural and religious weight of the taboo. It is a unique ethical and archaeological standoff. In most of the world, the drive to know battles only the ravages of time and looters. Here, it battles a living, deeply felt tradition. The tomb is a silent dialogue between past and present, where reverence actively chooses mystery over knowledge. The Daisen Kofun, shrouded in its own greenery and encircled by silent moats, is a monument to a different kind of truth. It asserts that some stories are meant to be kept, not told, that some sleep is meant to be eternal. It stands as a calm, massive rebuke to the modern imperative to dissect and explain everything. As we contemplate this serene, inviolate mound, our journey turns from this deliberate, cultivated silence to a city that was once deafening with life, a metropolis of unimaginable wealth that vanished not by decree, but by the slow, patient hand of the desert, leaving behind not a sealed tomb, but a whisper of salt and a legend of gold. The African city that glimmered in the salt. The deliberate, sacred silence of the Japanese tomb, maintained by water and law, finds its opposite in a city whose silence was earned through abandonment and the slow, granular work of the desert wind. We journey now to the southern edge of the Sahara, in present-day Mali, to a region of rolling sand dunes and rocky outcrops known as the Sahel. Here, from the 9th to the 16th century, thrived a city whose name became synonymous with almost mythical wealth, Timbuktu. But the Timbuktu of popular imagination, a lost city of gold, is a European fantasy, born from the tales of travelers like Leo Africanus. The reality, and the deeper, more shocking forbidden knowledge it guards, is far more substantial and profound. Timbuktu was not a city of gold mines, but of salt caravans and, more importantly, of books. It was a desert hub where the commodity that truly glimmered was ink. The mainstream historical fact is Timbuktu's zenith under the Songhai Empire in the 15th and 16th centuries, particularly during the reign of Askia Muhammad I. Situated at the crossroads of trans-Saharan trade routes, it connected the salt mines of the north, like Tagaza, with the goldfields of the south, like Wangara. Salt, vital for preservation and health, was traded literally weight for gold. This trade generated staggering wealth, which funded the city's great mosques, the Jingareba, Sankore, and Sidi Yahya, built from the very earth of the desert. But more significantly, it funded scholarship. Timbuktu became the Oxford, the Bologna of medieval Africa. The Sankore Mosque functioned as a university, attracting scholars from across the Muslim world. Its librarians and copyists produced and collected manuscripts on astronomy, mathematics, law, medicine, poetry, and philosophy. At its height, the city's private libraries held an estimated 700,000 manuscripts. This is where the quirky, fringe detail emerges, not about the city's existence, but about the near-total eclipse of this knowledge in the Western historical narrative. For centuries, the intellectual legacy of Timbuktu was dismissed or unknown in Europe, which preferred the myth of a primitive, gold-obsessed Africa. The true forbidden discovery began in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, as families in Timbuktu and surrounding towns began to reveal the caches of manuscripts they had protected for generations, often at great personal risk, hiding them in desert caves, burying them in sand, or sealing them in walls to protect them from humidity, insects, and, most formidably, from invaders and iconoclasts. These were not just religious texts. They included a 15th century treatise on astronomy discussing the heliocentric model centuries before Copernicus, medical texts detailing complex surgical procedures and herbal remedies, legal commentaries showcasing a sophisticated, pluralistic society, and historical chronicles like the Tariq al-Sudan, providing an indigenous history of the region. This corpus represents a parallel enlightenment, a river of scholarship flowing independently in the heart of the desert. The fringe theory here is less about conspiracy and more about the radical recontextualization this library demands. It suggests that the Dark Continent was, in its intellectual centers, brilliantly illuminated, and that the Renaissance was not solely a European phenomenon. The knowledge contained in these manuscripts could have potentially intersected with and influenced the broader Islamic world, and through it, perhaps even Europe, had the connections been stronger or the preservation more widely known. The act of hiding these texts was an act of preserving a forbidden knowledge, forbidden not by decree, but by the rising tide of colonial conquest, religious reformations, and a Eurocentric worldview that could not accommodate a sophisticated African intellectual tradition. The families who guarded them were protecting a truth that the wider world was not ready to see, a truth that could rewrite the history of science and philosophy. Scholars still debate the full scope and influence of the Timbuktu manuscripts. The process of cataloguing, preserving, and translating them is ongoing, a race against time, fragile paper, and political instability. The debate centers on how to integrate this vast intellectual output into the global narrative of medieval thought. Does it represent a unique African Islamic synthesis, or was it part of a more integrated network of scholarship, spanning the Islamic world from Cordoba to Samarkand? The answer, slowly emerging from the dust of the archives, is challenging long-held assumptions about the geography of knowledge. Timbuktu's legacy is a different kind of shock. It is not the shock of a single, anomalous artifact, but the shock of a whole missing chapter. The city's glimmer was not the fleeting reflection of gold, but the enduring, matte sheen of ink on handmade paper, a sheen that was almost extinguished. It speaks to knowledge not lost to a single fire, like Alexandria, but deliberately, heroically hidden in plain sight, waiting for a time when it could be seen for what it was. As we absorb the weight of this recovered library, our path now leads us from the dry, open secrets of the desert to a hidden, toxic river flowing in utter darkness. We descend beneath another continent to a place where an ancient emperor sought to build not a city of scholars, but a mirror of the cosmos itself, using a liquid metal that promised immortality, but delivered only a poisonous, shimmering secret. The subterranean river of Mercury. The recovered light of Timbuktu's manuscripts, a testament to knowledge preserved against the odds, now leads us into a profound, deliberate darkness. We travel to the heart of China, to the province of Shanxi, and to the foot of a man-made mountain, the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor, Qin Shi Huang. This colossal earthen pyramid, standing over 70 meters tall, is but the tip of an iceberg. It is the gateway to a subterranean empire, a microcosm built to accompany the tyrannical unifier of China into the afterlife. Historical chronicles, particularly the records of the Grand Historian by Sima Qian, written a century after the emperor's death in 210 BC, describe a fantastical underworld palace. It contained replicas of his palaces, pavilions, and officials, rivers and lakes of mercury simulating the great waters of his realm, and crossbows set to auto-fire at any intruder. For 2 millennia, this was considered poetic exaggeration, the stuff of legend. Then, in the 1970 seconds, farmers digging a well stumbled upon one of the greatest archaeological finds of all time. The terracotta army, thousands of life-sized clay soldiers standing guard east of the tomb mound. This proved the chronicles were not mere fantasy. And it raised a terrifying, electrifying question. What if the rest was true too? The mainstream historical fact is the empirical detection of that legendary mercury. In the 1980 seconds, Chinese scientists conducted a series of geochemical surveys over the tomb mound. They took core samples and measured mercury vapor emissions from the soil. Their findings were staggering. The mercury concentration in the earth above the tomb is significantly higher than in the surrounding area in some spots, up to 100 times higher. The pattern of this contamination isn't random. It mirrors the approximate layout of the major rivers of China during the Qin dynasty. This scientific evidence provides a chilling validation of Sima Qian's account. Deep below the grassy mound, a vast, miniature landscape was created, and through its valleys and channels, A river of quicksilver mercury was set to flow eternally, a shimmering, toxic map of the empire the emperor had conquered. This leads us to the quirky fringe detail, the profound and dangerous how and why. Mercury, or liusha, flowing sand, was deeply significant in early Chinese alchemy. It was associated with immortality, believed to be a key component in elixirs of life. Qin Shi Huang was famously obsessed with finding such an elixir, sending expeditions to mythical eastern islands. By building a mercury river in his tomb, he may have been attempting to alchemically ensure his immortality in the next world, creating a self-contained system of eternal transformation. The fringe theory delves into the scale. The chronicles speak of rivers and seas of mercury. Modern estimates suggest it could have taken over 100 tons of the liquid metal to create such features, a scale of mining, refining, and hydraulic engineering that seems almost impossible for the 3rd century BC. Where did it come from? How was it contained? Some researchers speculate the Qin engineers mastered early forms of glass or specially lacquered ceramic piping to channel the corrosive flow. The tomb becomes less a burial chamber and more a massive, deadly alchemical apparatus. A more speculative and darkly magnificent theory connects the mercury to the emperor's paranoia and his understanding of cosmology. Mercury is reflective. In the pitch-black chamber, illuminated by perhaps eternal lamps, another legend, the flowing mercury rivers would have created a wavering, shimmering reflection of the ceiling, which was likely inlaid with pearls and jewels to represent the stars and constellations. The underground world would thus have possessed its own shimmering sky, a perfect, enclosed mirror universe. This was not just a map, but a complete cosmic model, with the emperor at its center, forever ruling a duplicate realm that mirrored and replaced the real one. The toxic fumes would have acted as a final, insidious guard, a chemical curse upon any grave robber who breached the outer defenses. Scholars still debate whether the mercury remains in a liquid state, pooled in stone basins, or has long since seeped into the surrounding soil, leaving only the vapor trace as its ghost. They debate the true motivation. Was it purely symbolic, a display of ultimate power, or a sincere, alchemical bid for deification? The Chinese government has made the deliberate, cautious decision not to excavate the central tomb, citing both respect for the dead and the very real, extreme physical danger. The mercury levels are lethally high, and the potential for catastrophic damage to the contents is immense. This makes the tomb the ultimate forbidden discovery, scientifically verified, physically present, but utterly inaccessible, a known unknown of terrifying proportions. The mound sits today, a quiet grassy hill. Tourists photograph the terracotta army a mile away, but the heart of the complex sleeps, poisoned and pristine. It is a different kind of library, a library not of ideas, but of ambition, sealed in a toxic, liquid metal. It represents the ultimate taboo, the point where human endeavor, driven by absolute power and a fear of death, creates a monument so dangerous that even its exploration is forbidden. As we retreat from this shimmering, subterranean prison of an emperor's soul, our journey reaches its final, most fundamental stop. We must go back, far beyond empires and libraries, beyond metals and maps, to a layer of earth so ancient it predates civilization itself. There, in the primordial mud, we will find an object of heartbreaking simplicity that asks the most complicated question of all. Who were we, before we even knew what we were? The child's toy, in the age of stone. From the toxic, engineered grandeur of an emperor's tomb, we are pulled back through the layers of time, past the rise and fall of every civilization we have pondered, back to a world that is almost unimaginably silent. We arrive in a gravel quarry in central England, near the town of Kidderminster, in the 1960 seconds. Workers are digging through deposits of glacial till, material left behind by the retreating ice sheets of the last ice age. The soil here is ancient, a chaotic mix of rocks and clay dating to the Pleistocene epoch, between 450,000 and 380,000 years ago. This is a time before Homo sapiens walked the earth, when our distant cousins, perhaps Homo heidelbergensis, roamed a cold, harsh landscape. In this sterile, geologic layer, far beneath any human settlement, a worker's shovel strikes something unusual. It is not a fossilized bone or a sharp flint. It is a sphere, a near perfectly round sphere of rock, about the size of a cricket ball. It has been shaped, smoothed, and polished with immense care. It is the Kidderminster stone ball. The mainstream historical fact is the ball's incontrovertible context. It was found in situ in a Middle Pleistocene deposit, verified by geologists. It is not a glacial erratic, a stone rounded by natural tumbling in a river or glacier, as it is made of a hard quartzite not local to the area, indicating it was brought there. More importantly, its symmetry exceeds natural processes. Microscopic analysis reveals deliberate, multi-directional abrasion patterns, the telltale signs of humanoid hands working the stone against another to achieve its spherical form. This object, this beautifully crafted sphere, was made by a being with a mind capable of conceiving geometric perfection and hands skilled enough to execute it, hundreds of thousands of years before the earliest known complex tools, art, or ritual behavior. This is the quirky, fringe detail that cracks open the floor of human history. What was it for? The orthodox archaeological view, where it is acknowledged at all, tends to cautiously label it a bowler's stone, a weight for a hunting tool used to entangle the legs of animals. Yet, its perfect symmetry and fine polish seem excessive for a utilitarian object that would be hurled and lost. It feels intentional in a different way. The fringe theory, one that sends a chill down the spine of conventional anthropology, is that it was something else entirely, a toy, or an object of contemplation, or a sacred symbol. Its perfect roundness, a shape not found in nature, represents an abstract idea, the concept of the sphere, of containment, of the self-contained whole. To spend untold hours pecking and grinding a hard stone into this form suggests a mind not solely occupied with survival, but capable of pleasure in creation, of ritual, or of play. It is evidence of an inner life, a spark of something we recognize as fundamentally human, glowing in a species we consider pre-human. A more profound and unsettling speculation connects the sphere to other, later mysterious stone balls found in Scotland, the Neolithic carved stone balls of Orkney, though those are only 5,000 years old, and to the universal symbolic power of the sphere across cultures. Could this object represent a fragment of a very ancient, very slow-moving cultural idea? Was the making of a perfect stone sphere a practice, a ritual, or a skill passed down over hundreds of millennia, only to be lost and reinvented independently by our own species? The Kidderminster ball suggests that the roots of symbolic thought, of art for art's sake, or of ritualized object-making, may be twice as old as we ever dared believe. It implies that the human revolution of consciousness was not a sudden dawn 70,000 years ago, but a slow, flickering sunrise over a vast span of time, with flashes of brilliance appearing and disappearing in different branches of the hominin family tree. Scholars still debate the ball's authenticity and interpretation fiercely, often dismissing it as an anomaly or a later intrusion. Despite the geological evidence, because it so violently disrupts the established narrative of cognitive evolution, the debate is the purest form of paradigm conflict. To accept the Kidderminster ball is to accept that we have profoundly underestimated the minds of our deep ancestors. It asks us to look at a round stone and see not a tool, but a thought about form, about beauty, about the universe, or simply about the satisfying feel of a smooth, round object in the hand. It is a forbidden discovery because it forbids us our comforting timeline of human exceptionalism, placing a moment of inexplicable grace in a time of supposed brute struggle. This small, cold sphere, resting now in a museum drawer, is the ultimate cipher. It contains no writing, depicts no image, serves no obvious practical purpose we can discern. It is simply a perfect shape made by an unknown mind in an unimaginable past. It is the first and final mystery, a message in a bottle from a shore of time so distant we can barely comprehend its landscape. It brings our journey full circle, from the complex, layered secrets of civilizations back to the simplest, the most profound question of all. When did the spark of something more than animal first glow in the darkness, and what, in that first glimmer, did it choose to make? The sphere does not answer, it simply is, a perfect, silent echo from the dawn of becoming. Conclusion. And so, our journey through the whispers of the forgotten draws to a close. We have wandered from crypts of bone beneath modern streets to maps of impossible coastlines, from jars holding captive lightning to white marble cities sleeping in mountain snow. We have stood in the ashes of the greatest library, held a Roman face from New World soil, and traced the celestial gears of a sunken computer. We have seen skulls weep gold, iron defy rust, and 1,000 ancient hands press against the cold dark in a silent, frozen plea. We have puzzled over unreadable books, honored the sealed silence of imperial tombs, and unearthed the glittering legacy of a desert university. We have sensed the toxic flow of a Mercury universe beneath a quiet hill, and finally, cradled in our mind's eye, a perfectly round stone from a time before time, a single, polished thought from the deep past. These 15 discoveries are more than artifacts. They are fault lines in the bedrock of history. They are places where our story cracks open, revealing glimpses of other stories, other possibilities. They remind us that knowledge is not a linear path, but a vast, flickering landscape, much of it swallowed by shadow, with only isolated peaks catching the light. What is forbidden is often not hidden by malice, but by the gentle, relentless drift of centuries, the slow turn of the earth, or the simple, profound decision to let a sleeping ancestor lie. They teach us that the past is not a foreign country, but a series of rooms in a house we all inhabit, many of them locked, their keys melted down or lost. Some doors are sealed by poison, others by reverence, and some by the sheer, opaque weight of time. To listen to these whispers is not to solve mysteries, but to deepen them, to become comfortable with the beautiful, haunting truth that we may never know all the answers. So as the night deepens and the embers of curiosity glow low, let these stories settle not as puzzles to be solved, but as meditations. They are testaments to the human spirit's relentless drive to build, to explore, to know, and to leave a mark, whether in ink, in stone, in metal, or in bone. They are also humbling reminders of how much is lost, how fragile our collective memory truly is, and how the greatest discoveries often leave us not with certainty, but with a more profound and more wondering silence. The search continues, in desert sands and ocean depths, in mountain ice and library vaults. But for now, the narrative rests. The lantern is dimmed. The ancient stones return to their quiet watch, holding their secrets a little while longer, under the same stars that witnessed their making.